I swore I'd never say his name again. Swore it in front of a grave. Not a real one. Just a patch of dirt I'd chosen in my mind when I thought she was gone forever. No headstone, no flowers. Just a place to put the grief so it would quit chewing on me at 3 in the morning. That was 10 years ago. Tonight, I keep turning over this scar on my right hand. Runs from the base of my thumb clean to the wrist. Most men figure I lost a knife fight. They're half right. The man who gave me this scar also pulled me out of a pile of dead men in a canyon called Cimarron. Carried me 3 miles on his back through country that wanted to kill us both. Told me once, only once, that we were brothers. Not by blood, by something harder to name. I spent 15 years believing that. Then I rode into a town called Redrock Hollow, and I found out what that word was worth. I'm still not sure I did the right thing out there. Maybe you will be. What the desert teaches you, it teaches you the hard way. The horse smelled the water before I did. She'd been going since before sunup. 18 hours on hard pan and loose shale, her muzzle gone white with dried foam, ribs showing through her coat like barrel staves. A good horse doesn't complain. She just slows, and then slows more. And if you don't pay attention, you'll find yourself carrying the saddle instead of riding it. I was paying attention. The sky to the west had gone the color of old copper, that flat, ugly bronze that means a sandstorm's building somewhere beyond the horizon. No birds. Wind had shifted twice in the last hour, turning on itself like something that couldn't make up its mind. I'd been caught in open country in storms like that before. Twice I'd lived. Once, it was close enough that I don't count it either way. I read the ground the way an old man reads a letter, slow, looking for what matters. The arroyo I was following had been dry for weeks, its bed cracked into pale tiles of clay. But up ahead, where a mesa of red sandstone pushed up out of the earth and cut the wind, there was a line of young cottonwoods running along the base of the rock. Green. Too green for this heat without help. Water underground. Maybe 10 feet down, maybe less. I turned the horse toward the trees, and she didn't need convincing. We found the seep at the base of the rock. Not much, just a dark, wet patch in the sand the size of a man's coat, but enough. I let her drink slow, a little at a time, the way you have to when an animal's that far gone. And I crouched beside her and cupped water in my palm and drank too. It tasted of iron and clay and something I couldn't name. Clean enough in its own way. Nothing soft, nothing kind. I was refilling my canteen when I heard it. Not much. Just the particular kind of quiet that means there's a town nearby. No birds in the rimrock. A faint smell of wood smoke. The sounds that aren't sounds. The absence of wildness that gathers around people wherever they settle. I followed the base of the mesa east until the valley opened up, and I saw it below me. Redrock Hollow. 200 people, maybe. One road in and one road out, the same road. Adobe and rough-cut timber, a church that needed paint, a livery, a general store with a porch that had given up trying to stay level. Ordinary enough. Every hard-luck town in the territory looked like this one at a distance. But something was wrong. I couldn't have told you what, exactly. It was more of a feeling. The way a room feels different when people have been arguing in it before you walked in. People moved on the main street below, but they moved like they were trying not to take up too much space. A woman crossed from the store to the church and kept her eyes down the whole way. A man leading a mule stopped, looked up in my direction, then looked away too fast. I rode down slow. At the center of the main street, there was a well, stone-built, old, the kind that gets handed down from the families that first dug it. It had a chain around it and a padlock the size of a man's fist. I sat the horse and looked at that padlock for a while. Then I looked up at the sign above the marshal's office at the far end of the street. The original letters had faded past reading. Somebody had painted a new name over them. The paint was still bright against the weathered board. Recent. Marshall Cole Hazen. Below it, in charcoal, someone had written 4 words in smaller, shakier letters, written there and not scrubbed off, which told you something about the courage it took to put them there. God help us all. I knew that name. I sat there on that tired horse in the afternoon heat, and I knew that name the way you know a sound you heard in the dark. Not with your mind, but somewhere lower. I didn't ride on. I should have. I've thought about that many times since. Some debts you don't know you're carrying until they come due. I took a room at the only boarding house still open. The woman who ran it gave me a key without asking my name, which suited both of us. Her name was Margaret. Maggie, she said, when she said it at all, which wasn't often. She was somewhere in her late 30s, built the way working women get built. Not soft, not hard, just shaped by use. Hair the color of creek mud, pinned back so tight it looked like it hurt. Eyes that took your measure before you'd finished walking through the door. She charged me 50 cents for the night and told me supper was at 6, and she didn't hold it for late arrivals. I washed the trail off my face, lay down on a narrow cot, and stared at the ceiling. At midnight, I heard movement in the yard below. I was at the window before I was fully awake, an old habit, the kind you develop in the kind of places I'd been. The yard was dark except for starlight. A figure moving toward the well, moving quiet. The way people move when they're doing something they don't want witnessed. I pulled on my boots and went down. She heard me on the porch steps and went very still. Her hand moved toward the fold of her apron, and I caught the outline of a small pistol, a Remington Derringer by the shape of it, before she recognized me and let her hand drop. We looked at each other. "The well's padlocked," I said. "I know it's padlocked." Her voice was flat. "I was here when they put the lock on." "There a key?" "Marshal's office has it. You buy water by the jug, 6 in the morning to sundown. After sundown," she paused, "you go thirsty." I went to the well. The chain was good iron, heavy gauge. The lock was solid. I took hold of the rope and pulled. The bucket came up full, the water table barely 15 feet down. I set it on the stone lip and stepped back. She didn't move for a moment. Then she came forward and filled her bucket. "They'll know," she said quietly. "Water level drops, they'll know someone used it at night." "Probably. That'll mean trouble." "Probably." She didn't argue. I helped her carry the buckets back to the kitchen porch without being asked. We worked without talking. In the kitchen, she put a pot on the stove. I sat where she pointed. After a while, she set a cup of coffee in front of me, black, bitter as sin. Beans roasted too long because that's what she could afford. I drank it without complaint. "You're looking at the scar," I said. She wasn't, quite, but she had been. "Bullet," I told her. "Caught the bone funny. Healed up crooked." A pause. "Who did it?" "Old friend." She looked at me then, really looked. "Friend or enemy?" I turned the cup in my hands. "That's a good question," I said. She told me about Hazen. 2 years ago, 8 men and a deed to the water rights, legally purchased, signed and witnessed, which made it worse, not better, because there was nothing illegal to point to. He bought the land around the well and 3 parcels on the only road out of town. Anyone who wanted to leave or receive supplies had to deal with him. 3 men had tried to push back: a rancher who'd been in the valley longest, a young freighter who'd tried to run supplies without paying the road toll, her husband. "How did he die?" I asked. She was quiet a long moment. "Officially, he fell from his horse, broke his neck." She looked at her hands on the table. "His horse was found tied up outside the marshal's office. My husband was not a man who fell from horses." I put my cup down. "What did the law do?" Something crossed her face then, not quite a smile. "You're looking at the law," she said. "Cole Hazen is the law." I told her goodnight, went upstairs, sat on the edge of the cot in the dark and unbuckled the Winchester from my saddlebag and held it across my knees. "There's a letter carved into the stock. Just one. E. I've carried that rifle 11 years. I don't talk about the letter. After a while, I set it against the wall and lay back and watched the ceiling go gray with early light. Then I heard it. Slow footsteps. Deliberate. The kind a man makes when he wants to be heard. I was at the window. He was walking the far side of the main street, checking storefronts, the way a marshal does on his morning round. He'd gotten older. The hair had gone silver, weight through the shoulders. But I would have known him in a coal mine at midnight. As if he felt me watching, he stopped. He turned, looked up at the boarding house window. 15 years. I looked at the man who'd pulled me out of a pile of dead men in Cimarron Canyon, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. The same feeling I get before I pull a trigger. A man can owe another man his life. That doesn't mean he owes him everything else. He found me an hour later. No knock, just the door opening and him standing there with his hat in his hand. The way a man holds his hat when he's decided to be civil, but hasn't decided for how long. He looked older close up. New lines around his eyes. His mouth had gone tight in a way I didn't remember. But the eyes were the same. That pale blue that always looked like it was calculating something just behind whatever expression he was wearing. "You should have kept riding," he said. "Probably." He took the chair by the window without being invited. I sat on the cot. Neither of us spoke for a while. Outside, the town moved through its morning. Boots on boards, a wagon going past, the blacksmith's hammer starting up somewhere. "Cimarron," he said finally. Not a question, just the word, set between us like an object on a table. "Yeah. You remember what I told you coming out of that canyon?" "I remember everything about that canyon, Cole." Something moved across his face. "I'm asking you to do something simple. Ride out. Today. Don't come back." He set his hat on his knee and looked at it. "What's here isn't your concern. A man's dead whose horse was found tied outside your office. Accidents happen in rough country. Her husband." He was quiet. "I know about the water," I said. "The road toll, the 3 men. This is frontier territory. Men make arrangements. That's how it works out here. And you know it as well as I do." "I know it." I looked at him steadily. "I also know her husband didn't fall off his horse." The muscles in his jaw went tight. "You don't know what you're talking about." "No, but I know you." He stood up, went to the window, looked out at his street, his town, the well with his chain around it. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "I saved your life. You did. Then you owe me." I let that sit in the air between us. Let it be what it was. "Cole," I picked up the Winchester. Not threatening, just something to do with my hands. "A debt like that, it covers a man getting out of your way. Maybe it covers him keeping his mouth shut about things that don't concern him. It does not cover a town." I looked at him. "It doesn't cover 3 dead men." He looked at the rifle, at the letter carved into the stock. "E," he said. "Eleanor." My hands went still. "I know what happened to her," he said. "I know where she is." He let that land, watching my face. "You've been looking for 10 years. I can tell you everything, right now. All you have to do is ride out of Redrock Hollow and never come back." The room got very small. I set the Winchester down against the wall, very carefully, stood up, crossed to the window and stood beside him and looked out at the same street and didn't say anything for a long time. "That's your play," I said. "It's not a play, it's the truth." "Maybe it is." I looked at the well, at the chain, at the padlock catching the morning sun. "And maybe it's the most useful lie you've got left." I turned and looked at him, right at him, the way you look at a man when you need him to hear the thing behind the words. "You wouldn't use it as a bargaining chip if you thought I was leaving anyway. So I'm not leaving. And when this is over, you're going to tell me what you know. Not because I let you off, because it's the only thing you've got left to give me." He put his hat on. At the door, he stopped. "Don't make me bury you," he said. "Don't make me the reason you have to." He left. I stood at the window and watched him walk back across the street and into the marshal's office and close the door. Then I cleaned my Colt, one piece at a time, in the quiet. Some things you can think your way around. Some things just walk up and hand themselves to you. I won't pretend I had a plan. I'm not a man who makes plans the way soldiers do, with maps and contingencies and exit routes. I think on my feet, always have. What I had was a calculation. Cole Hazen had 8 men, a legal deed, and 2 years of fear working for him. I had a Winchester, a Colt, and 1 night's worth of knowing which way the wind was going to blow. It wasn't much, but I've worked with less. The next morning, I watched from the boarding house porch as one of Hazen's deputies rode out to the Reyes property at the edge of town. Old Man Reyes had been in this valley before Hazen, before the town had a name. He farmed a dry patch of ground and ran water to it through a hand-dug channel from a secondary spring up the hillside. 3 weeks ago, Hazen's men had diverted that channel. The old man had been buying water from the marshal's well ever since, at the going rate, which had climbed twice since I'd arrived. This morning, he was behind on payment. I watched from 50 feet away as the deputy pulled up the boards on Reyes's water channel one by one and threw them into the yard. The old man stood in the door of his house, his wife behind him, 2 kids behind her. The deputy said something I couldn't hear. Reyes didn't respond. The deputy dropped the last board and walked away. I stood there with my hand on the Colt and didn't move. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on the narrow cot and told myself all the reasons this wasn't my fight. I told myself I was one man. I told myself Cole had 8 and I had none. I told myself towns like this one sorted themselves out eventually, one way or another, and a drifter inserting himself into the middle was more likely to make things worse. I told myself, Eleanor. If Cole knew where she was, if she was alive, then walking into a fight here meant maybe never knowing. Maybe walking into a bullet that ended the question before it got answered. Then, just before sunrise, there was a soft knock at my door. I opened it. Reyes's youngest daughter. Couldn't have been 7 years old. She had her father's eyes and her mother's serious mouth, and she was holding up a small clay jug with both hands. It was their last jug of water. She didn't say anything, she just held it up. I took it. She turned and went back down the stairs. And I stood in the doorway, holding a clay jug that weighed almost nothing and felt heavier than anything I'd carried in a long time. I set it on the windowsill, buckled my gun belt, picked up the Winchester. A chain's only as strong as the man who put it there. I went to the livery first, borrowed a sledgehammer from a man named Whitmore, who asked me no questions, which told me he'd already guessed what I needed it for. Some towns, when they've been held under long enough, start waiting for permission to breathe. All they need is somebody to open the window first. The well sat at the center of Main Street. I walked to it in full morning light. No sneaking, no covering my tracks. The chain was good iron, the lock was better. I didn't try to pick it or shoot it. I used the sledgehammer on the iron bracket sunk into the stone of the well's rim. 4 strikes. The bracket gave. The chain fell free. The padlock swung on it like a small, useless pendulum. I coiled the chain, set it aside, left the well open. Then I set the sledgehammer against the stone and waited. Cole came in 11 minutes. He walked out of the marshal's office and down the street toward me with the same deliberate step he'd always had, and he stopped 10 feet away. Behind the closed doors and windows of Redrock Hollow, people were watching. I could feel it, the particular pressure of being observed, of being the thing a town is holding its breath about. I gave you every chance to walk away, Cole said. I know you did. This ends badly for you. Could be. I looked at him steadily. Most men who've been in real gunfights will tell you the same thing. It's slower than you think, and faster than you can understand. He didn't come himself that evening, which was smart. He sent 4 men. I'd spent the afternoon doing what I could, talking to Whitmore at the livery, to the Reyes family, to 3 others I judged were ready to be tired of being afraid. I didn't promise them anything. I didn't recruit them into a fight. I just told them where I'd be standing at sundown. They made their own choices. That part was theirs. I stood at the far end of Main Street as the 4 men came from the marshal's office. Armed, steady, professional. The kind of men who've done this before and don't make speeches about it. Neither did I. I stepped out of the shadows into the last of the evening light, hands away from my sides. Boys, I looked at each of them in turn. Before this goes where you're planning to take it, think about what you're being paid for. It was a water chain. Now it's this. What's it going to be next week? That the job you signed on for? 2 of them stopped. The other 2 kept coming. The first one reached for his gun. I drew the Colt and shot the weapon out of his holster. Not a clean trick shot, just the fastest angle I had on the only target that mattered. The gun spun into the dirt. He stood there, hand bleeding from the graze, staring at me like I was something he didn't have a category for. The 4th man put his hands up. Behind me, I heard movement. Doors opening, boots on board. Whitmore, Old Man Reyes, 2 others. Not gunfighters, a liveryman, a farmer, a woman with a rifle she clearly knew how to use, standing behind me without being asked. Sometimes that's all it takes. Cole came out, alone. His hand was on his holster, but not drawing. He stood in the street and looked at the four men, two retreating, one nursing a hand, one with his arms half raised. And then he looked at me.
And at the people behind me. "Last chance," he said. Old phrase, sounded different coming from a man losing ground. "For what, Cole?" He looked at the Winchester on my back, at the letter carved into the stock. "She moved on," he said. "It's been 10 years. She moved on. Maybe that's her choice to make. It is. Was." Something in his voice made me stop. Not the words, the flatness under them. The particular flatness of a man saying something true he's been avoiding saying. "She married?" I asked. He nodded once. I breathed in, breathed out. "All right," I said. I walked toward him, closed the distance, 5 feet. "Surrender the star, ride out, leave the deed on the desk. And if I don't, then we find out what Cimarron was worth." He looked at me for a long time, at the man he'd carried through a canyon, at the man he'd made into a ghost. Then he unpinned the star, set it in my hand, walked back into the marshal's office, and came out 20 minutes later, deed in hand, horse saddled, 4 men behind him who decided whatever Hazen was paying wasn't enough. He mounted without a word. His men fell in behind him. He rode past me without looking. He almost made it to the edge of town. Then he stopped. "Santa Fe," he said, to the air in front of him. "East side, near the old plaza. She runs a boarding house." A pause. "Her name's different now." He rode north. I stood in the street and watched the dust settle behind him, and didn't move for a long time. The well was open by morning. I watched old man Reyes pull the first bucket, not for himself, for a neighbor, and set it on the stone rim like an offering. His daughter stood beside him, the small one, watching the water the way children watch things they thought were gone forever. I saddled my horse in the livery before the town was fully awake. Whitmore charged me nothing, handed me a bag of oats for the mare, and didn't ask where I was headed. Maggie was on the boarding house porch when I came out. She'd known, somehow, the way she seemed to know most things in that town before they finished happening. Arms crossed, face arranged in the expression of a woman who has decided not to let something cost her more than she can afford. "You're going to her," she said, not a question. "I don't know what I'll find." "That's not the same as no." She was right. It wasn't. I mounted up and sat there a moment in the early light, looking at Redrock Hollow. The open well, the scrubbed-off charcoal words beneath the marshal's sign, the first smoke rising from chimneys. The ordinary morning of a town that had stopped apologizing for existing. I turned the horse east. The mare was rested and willing, her gait smooth on the packed road, the morning coming in low and golden off the mesa, throwing long shadows across the valley floor. The Winchester sat in its scabbard on my right. The letter E turned outward to the light. She had a different name now, a different life. Maybe that was the truth waiting at the end of this road. But 10 years of not knowing is its own kind of grave, and I'd spent long enough standing over it. The road ran east. A sky opened up ahead of me, pale and enormous, full of the kind of possibility the West offers to men foolish enough to still be looking for something. I rode toward it. Some debts don't get settled. They just get carried. You know, stranger, I've turned this over in my mind more times than I can count. Whether what I did out there was about justice, or Eleanor, or just something left over from Cimarron I never quite finished. Some nights, I'm not sure there's a difference.